Have you ever wanted to see a film that takes the most glamorous elements of 1930s railway travel, smash it all up and dump the remains in a hotel swimming pool? Then Emperor of the North is the film for you. This 1973 visualization of numerous travel novels from Jack London and Leon Ray Livingston was brought to you by director Robert Aldrich, with Lee Marvin and Ernest Borgnine in the spotlight, having previously worked together in The Dirty Dozen. What's the film about? Spoiler alert, you've been warned. In 1933, America is in the Great Depression. 1/3 of the population is out of a job, thus hobos rule the land, relying on the railways as a means of travel, shelter, and food. The king of the hobos is A Number 1, played by Marvin. He travels where he likes, when he likes, and makes living the hard life seem like the high life. Everybody looks up to him because he can ride every train he likes. That is, except for one. The 19, guarded by the Shack, played by Borgnine. He's a ruthless conductor who kills in cold blood anybody who sets foot on his train free of charge. The bets are made across the land to see if the king of the hobos can ride the most feared train in America and live to tell the tale. Has the Shack met his match, or has A Number 1 met his maker? On face value, it doesn't sound very intelligent. I mean, one man has to ride a train for free without getting killed because he can. He's not an escaped convict or a prisoner of war, there's no race, and the train's not a runaway. The stakes are just whether or not he can do it. When you try to describe it to a friend, it doesn't really sound like Von Ryan's Express, does it? However, it's a good job it focuses on this particular facet of the 1930s. We all tend to forget that while European and American railway technology was grabbing the headlines every year, Movietone newsreel propaganda could not hide the truth. Rail traffic in general was declining as personal and commercial road transport and commercial airliners were becoming more popular. Big railway companies were constantly investing in faster locomotives and more modern traction, but with it came a drop in receipts from normal traffic. And to cap it all, the new technology was often prioritized ahead of everyday services. The LNER were known to sideline commuter and freight trains just to let the Silver Jubilee go past. Now, before anyone has a go at me bashing technology, it is important because without it, we wouldn't have the steam engine. But top-link services with high price tags have never been all things to all people. So to demonstrate how hard things really were in the year of a Royal Scot touring North America is surprisingly refreshing, especially as it's one of the grittiest railway films you're likely to see. You'll get that impression rather suddenly from the opening scene. Once you get past the peaceful establishing shots of the train trundling along to a Marty Robbins country ballad, we set up the crew and a group of hobos trying to board Shack's train, and then this happens. By the way, if you're even a little squeamish, it's best that you look away now. Well, don't say I haven't warned you. Well, you can't say I didn't warn you. But with that said, it shows just how powerful visual direction can really be. Lots of films these days tend to cut sequences like this multiple times a second with POV shaky cam shots confusing the audience over what's supposed to be going on. Here though, it's just a few simple cuts and boom, you get what the film is like. It's simple, but deadly effective. The film was shot on the Oregon, Pacific and Eastern Railroad in roughly the same location used for Buster Keaton's The General 47 years earlier. The subsequent cinematography provides an interesting contrast of gorgeous, peaceful backdrops surrounding this big, lumbering monster guarded by a ruthless psychopath who drives fear into anybody who crosses him. Not just hobos, but his crew, his bosses, even the people who put out one of his boxcars when it catches fire. Yeah, about that ruthless psychopath, the Shack is without question the best part of the film. Ernest Borgnine is so sadistic and over the top that it's impossible not to enjoy his performance. I'm glad this film doesn't fall into the trap of giving the villain a backstory so the audience can relate to a character who's not really evil but just misunderstood, because in this film, we simply don't need that. We already know what drives him to be the way he is. He just wants to keep freeloaders off his train by any means necessary, at a time when America is overrun with freeloaders. Though it does make you question what the authorities have to say about his methods. Does he have a criminal record? Are the police and the railroad company turning a blind eye to every story they hear about him? Is everybody okay with him keeping people off his train by killing them? Or do they not have sufficient evidence to suggest he's a killer? Is it his word against the hobos? Who cares? He's just fun to watch.
Any tramp that sets foot on my train,
I'd hold him out and shake him to death like a snake. Next time I pick up an empty, I'm not going to have it burned.
there's only one beau that's got the stuff to try me. You ain't even on the list.
Something or nothing. Which did you see? You saw a goddamn hat?
I won't be going yard speed. I'm gonna highball.
I'm not giving away another free ride. I can't even see the end of my train in this fog. You don't ever hand me another flyer.
That's not what happened.
I don't care. You never let it happen again. Never.
This guy is so determined to keep people off his train that he's willing to risk colliding with another train just to prevent anybody getting a free ride. There's a 15-minute scene nearly halfway through the film where the 19 is driven out of a freight depot, in the dense fog, at full speed, on a single track, against the clock, to reach a passing loop just before an express mail service reaches the junction where the two lines merge into one. And to add to the tension, A1 diverts Shaq's train into a siding that's deliberately too short just so he can casually jump on. It's a scene that's so over the top that it could almost work as an entire film on its own. You could literally slap the end after they set off again and it'll make sense. The villainy of the Shaq is offset by the laid-back nature of his folklore nemesis. Although we don't know his backstory either, you get the feeling A1 has been surfing trains for a long time now. He knows all the tricks, like how to sleep through the pouring rain, how to slow a train down so he can jump on at ease, how to outsmart the police, even how to shake off a group of thuggish kids with a live chicken. Not a knife, not a gun, but a chicken. He's not even that bothered when he's wounded. He just smears some axle box grease over the top and pretends it's no big deal. Though he does need a partner in crime when he needs a change of clothes. The film was not a critical or commercial success upon release. It seems to have got overlooked amongst that brief period of generic B-list depression films made on a tiny budget with underwhelming reception. Fun fact, one of Martin Scorsese's earliest films got lost in the same crowd. A depression almost seemed to have its own genre for a little while, though one of the film's more credible criticisms is the character relationships. A1 and Shaq share barely a few minutes of screen time together, and A1's relationship with Cigarette is a bit confusing. For the first half of the film, Lee Marvin is convinced he's going to take on the Shaq on his own, but Keith Carradine is pretty determined they're going to take him down together. They team up in the second act, but it doesn't really make much sense as they're still out for themselves in the end. Even A1 seems unsure about it.
What the hell are you doing?
Teaching you.
Why?
I'm still working on that.
So much like any railway film, Emperor of the North seemed to find its real audience later on. That being said, some members of younger generations only seem to recognise this film for one of the most awkward reasons. Not because of who it stars, or who shot it, or any of the iconic scenes, but because of this noise. Gee, I wonder where else that generic piece of Foley was used. There, you got your Thomas reference. Are you happy now? I'd be lying if I said I didn't get that nagging curiosity why I found that bit so familiar when I saw this film for the first time, but liking Emperor of the North just because it used a soundbite from 80s baby childhood memories is just a bit sad. And weird, considering this film dates from 11 years before you-know-who began to take over the world. But that's not the elephant in the room which I have trouble addressing. Aldridge's intention for the Shaq, A1 and Cigarette was for them to represent the establishment, the anti-establishment, and the youth of today, respectively, which sounds like a fair balance of power, but the youth representative is both my biggest problem with the film and one of its cleverest hidden messages. Keith Carradine's character tags along with A1 from the beginning, but unlike A1, instead of being a cool guy we can look up to, Cigarette is straight away seen as an incompetent, inexperienced, cowardly, but utterly big-headed narcissist who wants all the glory, but completely lacks the ability and maturity to earn that glory. How original. In some ways, though, that's kind of what the film needs in order to ensure impressionable audiences don't mistake it as an anti-establishment, pro-revolution incentive for everybody to give up their 9-to-5 jobs, pack up and become hobos. A protagonist is defined as an advocate or champion of a particular cause or idea, and yet the protagonist of this film is someone who lounges around doing nothing, eating other people's food, wearing other people's clothes, and riding everywhere he likes for free. Now, A1 may have his reasons for doing these things, but Cigarette just seems to sponge off everybody, even his own kind. If you looked up the phrase all mouth and no trousers, there'd be a picture of his face next to the sentence. He's the hobo's equivalent of an internet troll. You get the impression that the filmmakers must have thought by having someone like this in the film, they can persuade the audience that if they think they can do better than A number 1, they're just going to end up like Cigarette. The somewhat forced moral of the story seems to be, don't bother becoming a hobo if you're just looking for an excuse to be lazy, because you're not just going to fail, you're going to end up more annoying than dubstep on repeat. Still, as annoying as Cigarette is, what happens to him in the end is pretty satisfying. Though the context surrounding A number 1's closing monologue makes the ending feel a bit anticlimactic. If you haven't had the chance to check it out already, Emperor of the North is pretty solid as railway films go. It's certainly one of the better ones. Sure, one of the messages is a bit forced, the acting is over the top, and there are a few cuts which are not for the faint-hearted, but as a motion picture that looks at the darker side of the 1930s, it's quite a refreshing watch. It's no masterpiece, but I'd say it's worth a try. I'm Chris, and I'm here to gauge the issue.